Hello, I'm Dr. Brian McDonough, and welcome to the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. I have a very special guest today. It is Ray Didinger. Now, those of you in Philadelphia, I don't even have to introduce him, but for those of you around the country, I can introduce him by saying simple things like, I'm obnoxious and I put 4 Emmy Awards up in the background because I'm bragging. He has 7, I believe. I talk about a book I wrote. He has like 13 books he wrote. The most recent book he has written is called Finished Business. Finished Business is a wonderful book which talks about his 50 years of writing sports. So we're going to talk a lot about sports. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl, thoughts he has. Ray Didinger, Hall of Fame member, will join us right after this.
The Dr. Brian McDonough Show.
Hello, I'm back, and Ray, welcome to the program. I love it. You're laughing. That jingle was written for our radio show, and I brought it back. Does that remind you of AM radio from about 30 years ago?
Very much so. Very much so. I like the tuxedo. That's very nice touch.
We're having fun with this, and I think that's part of what we're trying to achieve. And for those who have started to watch the show, gaining traction, bringing on a lot of interesting people. And I will, full disclosure, tell you that I'm a fan of Ray because I grew up in the Philadelphia area. Now, if you grow up and you're of my age, you used to read the newspaper in your living room, maybe laying down on the living room floor. You would read articles and things. Well, Ray Didinger has crossed through so many parts of a Philadelphian's life. First of all, as a writer, a columnist, and then beyond that, working for NFL Films where he won his Emmys. After he did that, he got into the media, working with local cable, which then became major cable, talking about football. And on top of that, he's continued and has written his books and does a talk show, more or less, which is wonderful on the weekends with an individual named Glenn Macnow, where they talk about all sorts of things and people like to listen. So I sadly know more about Ray Didinger and would look creepy if I say what I know from listening to his talk show. So I'll keep that to a minimum. So Ray, I want to start out by saying, when you look back at your career, I know in your book, you focused initially on the Super Bowl and the fact that Philadelphia finally won that Super Bowl. But what it really summarized was all those years you had as a fan, growing up as a child, the family relationships, your relationship with a Hall of Famer, Tommy McDonald, so many things. Tell me a little bit about what writing that book and that Super Bowl meant to you.
Well, I don't think if the Eagles had not won the Super Bowl, I don't think I would ever written the book. I've done 50 years in the Philadelphia media, had a lot of experiences, covered a lot of championships, 2 Flyers Stanley Cups, 2 Phillies World Series, the Sixers with Dr. J and Moses Malone, all won championships. I covered all of them. But there was one piece missing, and that was an Eagles Super Bowl. And when the Eagles finally won the Super Bowl, especially in the manner in which they did it and beating the team that they beat, it just made it kind of closed the circle. It kind of completed the story. And it was that whole day, the celebration back in Philadelphia, the moment that I had with my son on camera at the end of the game, when we celebrated on live television back in Philadelphia, all of that stuff just I kind of began thinking that, you know what, I think there is a book here. You know, the publisher, Temple University Press, had talked to me about doing sort of a 50-year memoir about my time doing what I'm doing. And I kind of said, I don't know, I'm not so sure it's a book. Who would care? But flying home from Minnesota, seeing what I had seen, and then coming home and landing in Philadelphia and seeing what was happening in the city, I said, no, you know what? Yeah, I think there's a book here. And so I sat down and wrote it. And it was a lot of fun, Brian, because it sort of forced me to look back over all that time and relive all of those experiences. And it was really, really a lot of fun.
And for a lot of people, the great thing about the internet is this goes around the country and around the world. I mentioned earlier, prior to the interview, I was talking with the Irish ambassador to the United States, and we have a lot of people from Ireland who follow us. And, you could talk to them about the Six Nations rugby tournament or talk to them about other things. That same passion, that same desire to win, whether you're in a little town like Galway or if you're in Philadelphia, it's that same link that brings people together. And you were tapped into that. As a writer, is that like an emotion that you tap into and your understanding by being a fan and a professional as well?
Yeah, I think so, Brian. And I think also the fact that I'm a native of Philadelphia, the fact that I was born here, raised here, grew up here, went to college here, got my first job here, and never left. I've lived my whole life in Philadelphia. So I've grown up in this community. I've grown up in this sports culture. I've lived through all the pain. I lived through the 1964 Phillies collapse. I saw the Eagles lose the Super Bowl with Dick Vermeil. I saw them lose the Super Bowl with Andy Reid. So all of that pain, all of those scars, all of that heartache, that's part of me too. So when they do win, I feel the same sort of elation that the fans do. I process it in a different way because I have to remain somewhat objective and I have to remain somewhat a journalist. But the feeling of, oh my God, we really did it, is as real to me as it is to the guy standing at Broad and Walnut. I always felt that, and we had some great sports writers in this town, as you know, Stan Hochman, Mark Wicker, going back a ways, Sandy Grady, Bill Lyon. I mean, there were some terrific sports writers in this city. But I always felt that I had a little bit of an advantage because I'm from here. Stan and Frank Dolson, they were from New York. Bill Lyon was from Illinois. Mark Wicker was from the Carolinas. They came here and they kind of assimilated into the sports community, but they didn't live it. I had that in my bones, And so when the Phillies finally won a World Series in '80, when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, when Dr. J and Moses brought home the championship from Los Angeles, I kind of understood what it meant to the people of this city because I was one of them. And I always felt that ability, that sort of sharing that kind of DNA with my readers and my listeners was always something that I had going for me. I didn't have to wonder about what does this mean to the fans? What does this mean to the city? I never had to worry about that. I never had to think about that because to me, it was as natural as taking my next breath.
It's interesting you say that, Ray, because I think the relationship father to son, mother to son, daughter, I mean, it crosses if you're interested. But I remember being in college, pretty much had always done well in school. And the first time I came across a course that really challenged me, I remember being really distraught and I wasn't handling it well. And I remember my dad saying, we're going to a 76ers game. And I said, no, I have to study. He goes, no, we're going to a game. Forget this. And we're going to go to the game. Years later, I remember my son in 2008 was a freshman at Malvern Prep High School. And he had his first quarter finals the next day. I said, I have tickets to game 5. We're going. He goes, but Dad, I'm going to mess up my test. I go, don't worry about it. You'll get past it. If you don't do well, you'll remember the World Series. And then, of course, it turned into 2 nights because they had to play a second night. And he looks back on it, though, and it's the relationship. He goes, Dad, I really started off really bad in high school because of you, but I don't regret it for a second. And I think in Philadelphia and many places, there's that feeling of what it's all about.
Sure.
Saying it's okay to boo, don't worry about it. But that's rude. Yeah, but you're at the game. Those kind of things are important. And you have tapped into that because, I mean, not just in your writing, but in your broadcasting, people connect to you. When I went to get the book, because I was hoping to interview you, I wanted to also read the book. I thought, he's going to sell the book. I'll pop in and say hi. I sat in line for like half an hour waiting with all these people to meet you because so many people have connected as well.
Yeah.
How does that feel for you? Like as a writer, as a broadcaster, that you actually have really made people consider you their friend?
That's great. It's very surprising to me. It never ceases to amaze me how how people, those book signings, those whole events. I mean, I had for that book, Brian, I had some book signings that lasted 3.5 hours. And it was everybody coming up and buying a book, wanting to get it signed, but wanting to tell me, oh, I read the, while I was standing in line, I read the part about this. And that reminded me of this. And everybody had a story, their own story. And I got it. I mean, I fully got it because, a big part of the book is my relationship with my grandfather, who owned Southwood, and that's kind of where I grew up. I mean, we lived in a little apartment on top of a shoe store, a couple blocks down on Woodland Avenue in Southwest Philly, right by the trolley line. And there's no grass there. I mean, you're a little kid, there's no place to play. So, I mean, I just went to my grandfather's bar every day, and I would be playing shuffleboard and drinking Coke and listening to the men talk. And of course, in a bar in the 50s, all the men were talking about was sports. I mean, they're talking about the Eagles, they're talking about the Phillies. And that was what I grew up with. And the education that I got there was, no, these aren't just games. These aren't just games. This is important. This is important to these guys. This is kind of how they define themselves. I mean, they got jobs that pay the bills, but that's not really who they are. They're working at GE or Westinghouse or something, but that's just paying the bills. That's just buying the groceries. What really matters in here is, are the Phillies going to beat the Cardinals tonight? Or are the Eagles going to beat the Browns on Sunday? That's what they get off on. That's what really keeps them going. It's not their work. And growing up there and seeing that every day and hearing the laughter, hearing the arguments, hearing all of that. Those are the guys that taught me how to be a Philadelphia fan. Being in my grandfather's bar, emptying the ashtrays at the end of the day, washing the glasses, being in that was the best preparation I could imagine for being a sports columnist in Philadelphia, because I was living it from the time I was 8 years old.
You're watching the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. My guest is Ray Didinger. He's the author of Finished Business. I highly recommend you get that book. I mean, it's available everywhere. You can get it on Amazon, anywhere you might want to look around the world, essentially, because I think he taps into, yes, it's Philadelphia sports, but it could be Kansas City. It could be Los Angeles. It could be anywhere in the country, because he's talking a lot about relationships and also 50 years. You've seen a lot, like the writers that you mentioned. I remember reading them. I had no interest in journalism beyond being a kid looking at box scores, but at the same time, we were all treated to the wonders of a Jim Barniak. I mean, you name it. There were so many. And what was great about it, especially in those days, was that was your window on the world. You might have heard the radio, but otherwise your connection with the Chicago White Sox was essentially what was either written or what was in a box score or what you caught. And at that point, knowing what I know about you, not personally, but from listening to you, I've heard stories that, like, you were the last person out of the press box. You were the person who was constantly working on your craft.
Always.
And it must have been important to you, because I'm sure, having worked in TV for a lot of years, you can get things done fast, or you can take your time and make it the best it can possibly be. And you chose to make it the best it could be.
Yeah, I have a book that came out a few years ago, which was a collection of my columns, some of my favorite things I've written over the years. And I called, the title of the book was One Last Read, The Collected Works of the World's Slowest Sports Writer. And that was me, for sure. I set a record, Brian, that I am confident in saying will never be broken. I was the last sports writer out of the press box at 25 consecutive Super Bowls. I dare say no one will ever break that record, nor should they try.
That's amazing. And you mentioned Super Bowl. Obviously, the way the internet is, these interviews live forever. And I love that fact, because having done television for many years, you did things, some of your best things, and then they were just gone forever. So I love the fact things live, but this conversation will. But with the Super Bowl coming up, we're going to get probably a lot of people wanting to know your thoughts, your experience. Like you said, you had 25 of them at least that you were writing for because you left the last.
Mhm.
What do you think about the coming Super Bowl with Cincinnati and LA? What do you think is going to happen, and what's your thoughts?
I think it's a fascinating matchup. I think it's you've got the Rams, who are kind of a glamour team, who are a team that are clearly in the "we're going for it" mode. I mean, they traded for Matt Stafford. They acquired Odell Beckham Jr. They traded for Von Miller. I mean, they're going for it. I mean, they've traded away draft picks for 10 years from now. They're going for it right now. So that's one team. And the other team is this team that nobody saw coming, the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, they have been a joke of a franchise for decades, and they struck gold a couple years ago when they drafted Joe Burrow. I mean, they have a kid now who everybody talks about. We got to find a franchise quarterback. Well, they did. I mean, he is a franchise quarterback. I mean, you can see it in his ability, and you can see it in his leadership. I mean, there's some great moments, and I'll tell people, just watch this on Sunday. You know, watch the dynamic of their huddle, the Bengals, and look at the way those guys look at Joe Burrow. I mean, that's the definition of leadership. You look in their eyes, the way they're looking at this guy. He has almost single-handedly taken that team from here to here, and it's him. They've got good players around him. They got really good receivers. This kid, Jamar Chase, is really, really super. And Higgins and Boyd are really good, and Mixon's a good running back. But it's Burrow. I mean, they're there because of him. And so that's the interesting contrast. You have this mega team with all the superstars and all the glamour playing at home in their $5 billion palace. And then you've got this scraggly bunch of guys coming in from Cincinnati with this great young quarterback trying to knock them off, and they beat the number 1 seed in Tennessee, down in Tennessee. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. And now they're coming right into LA and they're taking on the Rams, and they aren't scared one bit. Now you look on paper and it's a mismatch. You look on paper and you look at the two teams, you say, well, the Bengals have no chance. As long as Joe Burrow's on the field, they got a chance.
Have you seen that over the years? Like certain players have that ability to elevate the team. I mean, they may not have been that great, but they take them to another layer or another level.
Oh, sure. Elway was that. If you look back on those Denver teams early in his career, they weren't very good. I mean, their defense was mediocre at best. They had no running game. Offensive line was just kind of okay. The receivers were pretty good, but nothing special. What made him special was Elway. And he took that whole Denver franchise and kind of put it on his shoulders and took them to 4 or 5 Super Bowls, lost the first couple, then at the very end of his career, won 2 before he retired. But he was that player. And they don't come along all that often, those guys. But you know it when you see it, and you certainly see it with Burrow. When I saw him play at LSU, I really thought this guy has it. This guy just has it. He's really talented, but it goes beyond that. There's a toughness and there's a confidence that he just projects that it's contagious. I mean, everybody, including the coaches, they all feel it. They all feed off it. And I don't know that I don't even know that he's good enough to pull this one off on Sunday. He might be able to do it. I mean, he was an underdog in the Tennessee game. He was an underdog against the Chiefs for sure. But this week, I don't know. I've never seen a team get to a Super Bowl, much less win a Super Bowl, with an offensive line that is this poor.
A couple of games ago, he was getting pulverized in there.
He got sacked 9 times. He got sacked 9 times by Tennessee and still won, by the way, Yeah. That doesn't seem possible, but he did it. I think this is going to be that same kind of game. To me, the matchup, everything in pro football is really about matchups. And the one matchup to me that is just way, way one-sided is the Cincinnati offensive line, which is not very good, against the Rams front 7, with Aaron Donald and Vaughn Miller and those guys, which are very good. And I just don't know how the Bengals survive that. I don't know how Joe Burrow survives that. As good as he is, I just don't know that they're able to overcome that.
I want to be respectful of your time, but I do want to ask you about a period in your career where you had been a writer, you know, obviously Hall of Fame writer, and then you shifted gears and started working for NFL Films. I was going to show an NFL Films video, but I'm afraid I'll get pulled off YouTube for some copyright infringement. But, you know, if you saw, and I'm sure just about anybody either lived through watching them or has experienced them later, you know, the great voice of John Facenda and Harry Callis and the sounds and the music and all this. But you were writing, and that's where a lot of those Emmys came from. What about that aspect of your career? What was exciting about being there? Because I would think you could really dive into a project with them.
Yeah, it was great. It was a turn in my career that I never saw coming. I mean, I really thought that I was just going to be a newspaper guy forever and just, you know, work all the way. And that's all I ever really wanted to be. That's all I ever thought I was going to be. But, you know, NFL Films is based here in Philadelphia. You know, I knew Ed Sable and Steve Sable, the guys that ran the company. And it just so happened that come along 1996, 1997, they came up with this film project that they kind of asked me, hey, you know, would you want to be part of this? Help us out a little bit, with the idea that I would just be a contributor, that I would just help as a researcher. Not that I was going to leave the newspaper and go to work there, but they just felt that they had a project called Football America, that they thought that I could help them sort of shape this idea. They had it as an idea, but they needed to fill it in. So I said, sure, heck, positively. I'll work with NFL Films anytime. So I spent about a year working with them, developing that one particular film while I was still working at the newspaper, the Daily News. And at the end of that year, the film came out. It won an Emmy Award. And I'm packing up the office, getting ready to go back to the Daily News. And Steve called me in and said, how would you like to stay here? How would you like to stay on as a producer? And, you know, how do you say no to NFL Films? I mean, if you really love football, and I really love football, there's no better place to work. And there was no better boss than Steve Sable. So I said, you know, wow. You know, I'm 50 years old. I've never edited a film, really. I've written, but I've never edited. And he said, don't worry. He said, don't worry. He said, you know football and you know how to tell a story. The rest of it we can teach you. And so I, you know, I had known Steve long enough that I just trusted him, and I took the leap and I left the newspaper. Everybody said I was crazy that I left my newspaper job and went to NFL Films, and I spent 13 great years there and thoroughly enjoyed it, learned a lot, and got to work on some projects that I was really, really proud of, and met some great people. And it was a wonderful, wonderful second chapter in my life.
You know, it's funny. It's a similar experience. I remember I was doing radio, and I'm practicing, obviously, as a doctor, and I wanted to get into TV. I thought about it. I remember a news director at the time said to me, well, it's easier for me to teach you television than to take one of my reporters and send them to med school. And it was kind of a similar,
Right.
Let's give it a try. Now, I didn't have to give up everything, because that's a bold move. But at the same time, those types of experiences, they open you up. I think you find creativity that perhaps you didn't think existed.
Right.
And it makes it a lot of fun. What do you consider your biggest disappointment in all these years? I mean, clearly the litany of success is incredible, but what didn't you see or didn't do that you kind of wish, if you had another shot at it, if there's anything that you would have done?
Nothing.
Wonderful.
Nothing.
That's great.
Honestly, I can't. If the Eagles had not won a Super Bowl, if the Eagles had lost Super Bowl 52, if that last Tom Brady Hail Mary had been caught, and the Eagles had lost, I would probably tell you, you know, Brian, my only disappointment is I never got to cover an Eagles Super Bowl win. But once that happened, you know, that was kind of it. I said, wow, you know, it finally happened. And that was, again, like we started our conversation, that's really the impetus for the book. You know, that was kind of at the end of 50 years and covering all the sports and seeing the other teams win a championship. that was like the one piece that was missing from the puzzle. And once I had that, I had the whole picture, you know. So no, I have been so happy and so blessed and so lucky to do what I've done for 53 years now in my hometown, and to see all these teams win a championship and be able to share it with my family, my kids, my parents. You know, there were no bigger Philadelphia sports fans than my parents. And when I got put into the Pro Football Hall of Fame back in 1995, you know, my parents came to Canton for that weekend. And I can honestly tell you, I have never seen my mother and father happier than they were the day that I was honored at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They being able to share that moment with them, knowing what it meant to them, was really wonderful. It's a time in my life that I'll always treasure.
What a wonderful thing. And we didn't even touch on the play you wrote. There's so many stories we could talk about. And I would say read Finished Business, because you can get a lot of these stories and other information. And obviously there are a number of books, over a dozen, you know, you can find more about Ray and what he's done. And also, if you're interested, I will tell you, it's great listening. I believe, well, if you're on the East Coast, it's probably 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock on Saturdays and Sundays.
That's correct.
He does his show. It's on the Odyssey network, Odyssey app. If you get that, just do WIP. You can get it, hear it anywhere you are. And it's talking about sports. And yes, it's Philadelphia centered, but it's also very entertaining. I mean, there's definitely a feeling of, you kind of said at the beginning, like people are sitting together in a bar talking about sports. The people who call up are old friends, you know, listening. I say, I know, I recognize that voice. Yep. you know, and to the point where you know stories. It's fun, and I think that's what sports needs to be. It brings people together as a community, especially right now. You know, we're dealing with some very difficult times during the pandemic. Certainly, a lot of people who watch this started watching are talking about the pandemic, but moving out from it, they're the kind of things you need to do. We need to be a community. We need to be more together and enjoy these things. So, Ray, thank you so much for giving your time and all you've done. And honestly, selfishly, I've taken more advantage of you than you have of me, because I've had the opportunity to enjoy all the great work you've done. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Brian, it was an absolute pleasure. I'm glad we got to do this, and maybe we can get to do it again sometime.
Thank you, Ray. Have a great night. Thank you.
You too, Brian. Thank you.
The Dr. Brian McDonough Show.